So there are several topics that can be discussed in the context of these verses. And basically, we would want to take the context that includes the previous situation which the devotees of the Lord were facing, so that we could understand the context more clearly. Now, what is being seen here is that a Brahmastra, a weapon, is being released on the Pandavas, and the weapon has the capacity to annihilate and destroy the entire cosmos, right up to the higher planetary systems. The higher planetary systems that come under destruction on a daily basis go right up to Maharloka. Maharloka is spared, and the residents of Maharloka, Janaloka, Tapaloka, and Satyaloka, they don't face annihilation at the end of Lord Brahma's day. If we were to count in terms of, we want to take into consideration that there is annihilation of the lower planetary systems, including this planetary system, which is Earth, at the end of Lord Brahma's day, there isn't annihilation above Maharloka. It is also said that Maharloka houses all the great saintly personalities, including Sri Brigu. There are incarnations who are present there, who are continuing their, in other words, you're continuing their tapasya, continuing their protection of the universe. And then they all depart at the end of Lord Brahma's day to higher planetary systems, because the heat from destruction is such that they have to move higher just to escape from the heat. This is read in the Srimad Bhagavatam further down. Now, what is being compared here is that the heat generated was so intense that it could scorch the planetary systems. It could scorch creation by the Brahmastra, because both Ashwatthama, the son of Drona, who was a Brahmana by birth because he was born to Sri Dronacharya and Kripi, he was a Brahmana by birth. He was also a Brahmana by training, because he was tutored and he was under the protection of his father. But he also had Kshatriya qualities. What is interesting to note is that in the previous ages, the perfection of weaponry, the perfection of being able to take on adversaries on the battlefield required Brahmanical knowledge, which means that one had to have perfection of a mantra before they could practice the physical aspect of firing a weapon. And because mantras were the domain of the Brahmanas themselves were adept in weaponry. They could practically teach mantra sadhana, and the mantra sadhana itself would translate into physical transformation and destruction if in the hands of a capable warrior. So there was a need for Brahmanas to be involved, and there were many adepts during Krishna's time. Dronacharya, Kripacharya, these are all Brahmanas. Sri Parashuram, incarnation of the Lord, again coming from a Brahmanical lineage, but was an expert in weaponry, where he taught so many personalities. Even Dronacharya was a disciple of Parashuram, Lord Parashuram. So the point being that there was a very high birth, and there was also exposure to knowledge. However, it's fascinating to note that Ashwatthama did not have the ability to counteract or withdraw. So he only had the ability to destroy. So there seems to be the mode of ignorance very much present. He could destroy, but he couldn't counteract and control what was being released, which was the external energy of the Lord. What is being released is the manifestation of destruction, which is the external energy of the Lord. This is under the domain of Lord Shiva. This destructive aspect is the domain of Lord Rudra. And that particular aspect is controlled by him only, and it is parted on to those who are qualified to counteract and control. So you can't control external energy that easily, simply because she is, in one sense, the cause. She is the immediate cause. She is the immediate cause because Krishna doesn't come in touch with the material world. And as a consequence, the activities of the material world are being managed by his external potency, Sri Maya Devi, who is personified by Sri Durga Devi. Now, this whole idea of weaponry which can destroy comes from the potency of Lord Shiva. And partial knowledge was present in Ashwatthama. Even though he was born to Dronacharya, he did not have the ability to counteract and withdraw what was being fired, because it was just partial. Maybe he was not qualified to even hold that knowledge on. So this is very important for us to note, that Arjuna and the Pandavas even though they were so much in proximity of this great weapon which could scorch the creation, they were protected by Krishna himself. So it's very important to see that they were protected. But what is also very important in terms of us understanding the circumstance that took place 5,000 years back, how is it relevant for a Krishna conscious practitioner in 2021 who is practicing in different parts of the world? And how is it relevant? What is it which we can take from the three verses that we have just spoken of? There's a certain context that one has partial knowledge. One could be born in certain Brahminical circumstances, but they did not have complete knowledge. This knowledge itself was present in different places. It was quite confidential. Even though he was a son of Drona, he didn't have it. That is the context of the verse. But then how is it applicable? How is it relevant to 2021? This is very important for us to understand, because if we can't apply, we can't live. And if we can't live Srimad Bhagavatam, then we can't experience what is to be seen in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Yeah, which is the whole purpose of coming in touch with Srimad Bhagavatam, is to be able to imbibe the teachings of the Bhagavatam and to be able to live and experience Bhagavatam, so that we could understand the experience and the emotions of the followers of Lord Chaitanya, because we are followers of Lord Chaitanya. Our business is to follow in the footsteps of Lord Chaitanya's followers. As a consequence, it's very important for us to understand context. Very important to understand context in the present juncture, because we are participating in the Yuga Dharma. First and foremost, what is the most important message that we glean from this particular first part of Srimad Bhagavatam? This is the first canto. What do we glean from this? First and foremost, peace is not the objective of Krishna consciousness. Let's remember this. Peace is not the objective of Krishna consciousness. It is a very low bar. We are not interested in peace. We are not interested in peace because peace is granted by the mode of goodness. It produces certain level of complacency. We are not interested in peace. We are interested in a goal which is far more lofty. It is not even transcendence. We are interested in the rasa that's available once we reach transcendence. So our goal is way too lofty for us to set a goal of just peace. Peace is not the objective of Krishna consciousness. That is being observed right at the onset of Srimad Bhagavatam, because the devotees are being put through such intense tribulation. What does it also mean? It means that Krishna Prema can exist with problems. Krishna Prema can exist with problems. What does it mean in the context of 2020? One could have relationship issues, but yet could be rewarded with Krishna Prema. One could have economic issues, they could still be rewarded with Krishna Prema. One could have health issues, they could still be rewarded with Krishna Prema. As a consequence, one could have problems of this world and yet be given the most wonderful gift, which is unimaginable to even the Lord of Vaikuntha. He comes down as Advaita Acharya and he's offering prayers to Lord Chaitanya to descend, because even he doesn't have the complete grasp of what goes on in Vraja. That gift is being given to us by Srimati Radharani and Krishna in the form of Lord Chaitanya. So our own goal is not peace. So do not set a very low bar for what is being given. What is being given is far, far above what is being given by the material mode of goodness. The material mode of goodness gives peace. Now, this is not to say that one should remain lacking peace. This is not to say that one should have problems. No, we are not really desiring any kind of pain. We are not interested in anything if it's not going to help us further Krishna consciousness. But setting a low bar is not one of them. So the first and foremost principle that we see in the beginning of the Srimad Bhagavatam is that we are into a PhD program. We are not into school. We are not grade school students. We do not want to expect grade school results of having a certain level of peace and certain level of good things going on, etc. That is not our goal. This is a PhD program, and a few people qualify for a PhD, and a few people graduate. Despite all their attempts, only a few people are going to qualify and a few people are going to graduate. So when you're looking for a PhD qualification, then we have to be ready to put in the hours. We have to be ready to put in the sacrifice. We have to be ready for paying the price. And at the very onset in Srimad Bhagavatam, we are being seen. At the very onset of Srimad Bhagavatam, am I still being heard? Because there was an interruption.
Yes, Prabhu, we can hear you fine.
Thank you. Yeah. So at the very onset of Bhagavatam, Srimad Bhagavatam, we are seeing a circumstance that is extraordinarily turbulent for the most dear devotees, but they have Krishna with them. So they are practically being protected by Krishna despite all kinds of tribulations and so on and so forth. There's proximity of Krishna, there's Krishna prema, even though it's a very complex situation. So we want to understand this very clearly. Now, what is it which Arjuna and the Pandavas are doing? They are accepting the circumstance. So there is Trinadapi Sunichena, which is being demonstrated. They are accepting the circumstance being imposed upon. They are not questioning the circumstance, because one could really stay in that place and say that you are God, you are the supreme personality of Godhead. Everything is completely under your control, and we are your devotees. We have nowhere to go. But yet, why is this happening to us? Why should Ashwatthama slaughter our children? Why should he fire a Brahmastra? Why should this be happening to us? But what we see here, right at the onset of Srimad Bhagavatam, is that there's a certain mindset. This mindset itself of the devotees is a culture. It is a culture of humility, which is starting right at the beginning. And the culture of humility is to be able to accept fully, is to be able to accept fully the aspect of Krishna consciousness, which talks about Trinadapi Sunichena Tarori Vasaishnura, accepting each and every movement as being arranged by the Lord. This is Trinadapi Sunichena. This is particularly spoken of by Lord Chaitanya because we need to process life as the Pandavas did. We need to understand that there is a very loving, benevolent, extraordinarily loving Krishna who is waiting to bring us back. And he is making arrangements in life. We need to accept life as an arrangement of the Lord. This is very important. This is Trinadapi Sunichena. Tarori Vasaishnuna. We tolerate the circumstances of life. We tolerate the circumstances of life and understand and accept the circumstances of life as arranged by Krishna. This is what the Pandavas did. They accepted the circumstances as arranged by Krishna. But then they also acted upon the circumstance. They also acted upon the circumstance with great fortitude. They did not really fall back and say that Krishna should do all the heavy lifting. They practically also acted upon the circumstance, which practically is the other lesson that we want to learn. We also learn to learn from this particular instance right at the onset of Srimad Bhagavatam, where the concept which is given by Srila Rupa Goswami is being demonstrated. Anya bilashita shunyam jnana karvadi anamritam. Yeah, Anya bilashita shunyam jnana karmadi anavritam. Anukulena Krishna Anushilanam Bhakti Ruttama. Yeah. So Anya Bilashita Shunyam Jnana Karmadi Anavritam. Now, what does it mean? It means that they have no other objective. They do not have objectives of either gaining materially. They do not have objectives of Gyan. And what is Gyan? Gyan is just not knowledge. Gyan is superior to karma. What does it mean? Is that fruitive action is to engage in activity, to worship the deity, perhaps call upon the Lord's names to achieve a certain result, which we believe is favorable for us. It is very, very good for us because we're going to experience a better quality of life. Now, the Jnani, on the other hand, has rejected this notion. He has observed the fact that no matter what you do, there's a certain duality present in this world. And this duality is such that there's no point in endeavoring for such duality. It is better to aim for departing from this entire situation to the transcendental plane. So the Jnani has a much more loftier approved goal because he does not want to engage in the machinations and the changes that occur of jumping from one particular branch of the tree to the other in the material universe. Instead, he wants to say that all of this is just complete nonsense. I want to just go higher and I want to be transcendently situated. Now, the Jnani is better. But then what is the Jnani doing? This concept of the Jnani is he says, I see suffering everywhere. Regardless of the wonderful things that happens, is fleeting. As a consequence, it is just suffering. So I want to leave. The Jnani wants to end suffering. The Karmi wants to gain improvements and make adjustments to life so that they could live better. Both of these are being rejected. So we are not interested in moksha. We are not interested in moksha. This whole concept of moksha, of wanting to leave the material existence and go higher into the higher plane, is not the objective of Krishna consciousness. Neither is it the objective to gain and improvise upon the circumstances of life as being given here on the planet. Neither of these are being pursued fully. No, that is not being encouraged at all. So we see this particular instance of Trinadapi Sunichena Tarori Vasaishnuna, Amani Manadena Kirtaniya Sadahari. We also see the instance of Anya Bilashita Shunyam Jnana karmadi anuvratam anukulyena Krishna anushilanam bhakti uttamam. Here, anukulyena Krishna anushilanam, anukulyena refers to following in the footsteps of Srimati Radharani. That is what is anukulyena for Gaudiya Vaishnavas. Anukulyena is not simply to accept Krishna and say that I'm not cursing you, I'm not really hurling abuses at you, I'm not complaining to you. That is not what is meant by being favorable to the Lord. By being favorable to the Lord, the standard given to us is to follow in the footsteps of Srimati Radharani, because we have been given the highest possible capacity to render service by coming in touch with Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So we really are not going to settle for being favorable to Krishna. We want to follow in the footsteps of those who have been extraordinarily successful in serving him and associating with him. So we want to follow in their footsteps. Now, we see this particular objective being enacted, which requires Trinadapi Sunichena. There is a need for basically being able to tolerate, but also for being able to strategize and for them to be able to act upon. So the second principle that we want to talk about. So the first principle is we are not looking for peace. We want to be very clear. We want to have a very lofty goal and be ready to pay a price. Yeah. Second principle is that we want to understand how to manage things in life. So what is being seen here is that Ashwatthama, he had partial knowledge. So he was not skilled in one sense, even though he being a Kshatriya of a high station, because he was trained by karma, he was a Kshatriya. He was trained by one of the best teachers, who was also the teacher of Arjuna, but he was partial in his ability to counteract. So there is a need for a combination. The reason why Arjuna could counteract was because Krishna willed it. That is the purport that's being given by Srila Prabhupada. That is the opinion of our acharyas. Krishna desired Arjuna to win. Krishna desired Arjuna to be successful. As a consequence, Arjuna could not only counteract, but he could withdraw, he could do whatever he wanted. The power came from Krishna. This empowerment comes from Krishna. But what was the quality which practically brought this empowerment from? So we'll have to look at the second step in understanding these verses in the context as well. Whenever we are in Krishna consciousness, be it in in any kind of I would say circumstance, there are two aspects of Krishna consciousness that have to be understood. One is Krishna consciousness requires very, very deep bhajan. Very deep bhajan would mean that one has to have the ability to focus on attaining the fruit of chanting Harinam, which is Krishna Prema. We need to understand and we always need to keep in mind that we are doing what we are doing to attain the position of Krishna Prema for us to be able to fall in love. Because without falling in love with Krishna, surrender is impossible. You cannot surrender without being in love. Without loving Him and without surrendering to Him, we are practically not very useful to Him in terms of service. So the concept of service begins to the extent to which one is in love with the Lord and one is also surrendered. As a consequence, intelligence comes in. Now, where do we see this happen again in the Srimad Bhagavatam? I just don't want to spoil the experience of the future of Srimad Bhagavatam for you because you're in the first canto, perhaps you're doing it for the second or third time in your lives. But I was wanting to say that the second canto shows us that Lord Brahma, the creator of the universe, was bewildered. He was bewildered as he was sat down and he began the process of creation. He just did not know what to do. He did not know where to begin. He did not know what kind of process was required. He didn't have a vision. This is quite unusual because he did not have a vision. He did not have a proper understanding of what was expected of him. Now, as he sat there quite bewildered, but expecting to be protected by the Lord because he is also a guna avatar. He is also a guna avatar of the Lord in the form of, being the secondary creator. And as he sat there, he heard the word tapaha. Tapaha essentially means that one has to go through penance. And what is the penance which Lord Brahma did? He was given a mantra to chant. Krishna gave him the Gayatri mantra to chant. And he chanted the mantra for 1,000 years. What did the mantra do? The mantra practically took Lord Brahma's consciousness and transformed it into complete knowledge to the point where, at the summation or the end of his particular sadhana, he was able to have direct perception of the Lord. He had a direct audience of the Lord, Narayan, where he was able to visualize and receive benedictions. He understood what the Lord wanted after completing tapasya. The tapasya process of chanting of the mantra that was given practically took him from a position of ignorance to helping him to understand what he was in relationship to the Lord. So the whole concept that we have been given by Lord Chaitanya is for us to be able to receive faith from someone who is very deeply faithful. And then the faith is watered by chanting, by bhajana kriya, which is basically the chanting of Harinam. Then we remove the so called anarthas that are within our heart. And the anarthas themselves are nothing but passion and ignorance. That's why the Bhagavatam says, Nashta prayeshu abhadreshu. Nityam Bhagavata sevaya. Nashta prayeshu abhadreshu. The Bhagavatam is defining abhadreshu as passion and ignorance. And passion and ignorance obfuscate, they cover, they practically blind one to be able to see the truth, which is basically what the sadhana process does. It alleviates and removes us from material influences of passion and ignorance. And we basically also being given the process to sit in the mode of goodness as a platform so that then we can transcend and then develop a deep relationship. The beauty about our process is everything is achieved with Harinam. Everything. We don't have to look for any other solution. Everything is achieved with Harinam. We basically need to understand that we have to practically move forward from the perspective of understanding that we need to depend on Harinam. Depending on Harinam is what Sri Haridas Thakur talks about to Lord Chaitanya. He says, what is the definition of a sadhu? The definition of a sadhu is one who is completely dependent on Nam. So Harinam practically takes us from the position of being contaminated by passion and ignorance and positions us to a point where we start receiving information about our eternal rasa, the relationship that we have with the Lord, and practically increases our sambandha. As Krishna sambandha increases, it gives us an ability to fall in love with him. Because one cannot fall in love unless one has knowledge of who they are and they also have knowledge of who the beloved is. So we are chanting to understand who we are. We are chanting to understand the Lord. There's an increase of Sambandha Gyan. As there's an increase of Sambandha Gyan, we become better positioned to understand the needs of the Lord. He doesn't have any material needs. He doesn't have any spiritual needs. It is all for a matter of being able to engage in rasa, because there is always a give and take. There's a give and take, and one cannot be inert in experiencing give and take. So there's a give and take in the spiritual sky. People cook for his pleasure, they feed him, they experience pleasure themselves. They also take from him, they experience pleasure. So the point being that there is interaction and this is very dynamic. So, what is the Lord's preference? What does he like to eat? What does he like to wear? We all know all of this because someone before us, the predecessors, they attained complete knowledge of the Lord. And as a consequence, they were able to note down these characteristics, and we are receiving benedictions and we are receiving faith from the chain of disciplic succession. But it is also for us to discover and for us to experience, because these are milestones. So we discover, we experience milestones all whilst chanting Harinam. So if there is any activity which is of great importance in our movement, it is the chanting of Harinam. And if there's any singular activity that you can do, which if you cannot do anything else, it is Harinam. If there is really no other choice, I can't do this and I can't do that, everybody can chant. So chant Harinam, because chanting of Harinam is practically both the sadhana and the sadhya. Harinam takes us from being contaminated by passion and ignorance to a point of bringing us and making us fall in love completely with the Lord. It takes us all the way from this particular circumstance of being materially conditioned to the point of being a resident of the spiritual sky, and nothing changes. So when nothing changes, you can consistently build upon the sadhana over even several lifetimes. You see, some devotees, the moment they come into the sangha of others, and they immediately get initiated, they just take off like a rocket. There are some others who are somewhat laggard, they can't really catch up, they take some time, and then they take a lot more time than many people do. So there are different levels of devotee consciousness that we do see within our movement, and it is because some of them have done what they had to do in the previous lifetime. As a consequence, they take off like a rocket in this particular lifetime. They catch up with the dormant, I would say, effects of what was already being accomplished in the previous lifetime. So if you have chanted for an entire lifetime in the past, that remains as credit. And then that spiritual credit practically allows one to take off in this particular lifetime. So the point being that Harinam is a consistent strategy. It is basically the consistent sadhana that one requires, which can take one from being contaminated with passion and ignorance and bring them in touch with Krishna directly and engages in his service. So the idea of receiving complete sambandha with Krishna is done through Harinam. It is done through Harinam. Through we basically engage in the chanting of Harinam. The more serious we get with Harinam, the better we would be in terms of us being able to come closer to the ability to serve Krishna nicely. So, the objective of being able to fall in love and surrender and engage in service, all of this is being accomplished by the chanting of Harinam. So, there's a need for us to understand that without bhajan, we will not even know what Krishna wants us to do. This is the case with Lord Brahma. Why should we even imagine that we would be better than the creator, the secondary creator? If Lord Brahma had trouble understanding the desires of the Lord, what makes us think that we would have a very good chance without at least doing what has been asked of us? Yeah. So that basically is kind of a point of waking up and saying there's a need for bhajan. Deeper the bhajan, greater would be the realization of what Krishna wants us to do. Because Krishna will guide us from within. He will make arrangements to bring us in touch with knowledge, which will give us insight as to what is it required, which is going to be more important for us to be able to move forward. This is individually, it is also collectively. The individual progress that is being seen, that is the responsibility of the individual. Collective progress is the responsibility of leadership. So practically, both are required because there is a collective arrangement that has to be made, and then there is an individual arrangement that has to be made. The individual arrangement and collective arrangement are all particularly aligned to facilitate and grow within spiritual consciousness, within Krishna consciousness, by the calling upon of Harinam. Now, what is important for us to understand is that this bhajan is extraordinarily powerful, it is required. But bhajan alone is not being seen in Srimad Bhagavatam. It is not being seen in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Bhajan is being combined with strategy. It is being combined with skills. So one needs to have strategy. Where was it seen last? Srila Prabhupada had an extraordinary plan. His Gurudev had an extraordinary plan of how to preach. They all had planning. There was a lot of planning on how to expand Krishna consciousness, how to give Krishna consciousness, what would be the current changes required, how do you present Krishna consciousness and adjust the offering. The adjustment of the offering is basically the adhikar of the person who is doing it. Basically, it is based on someone of Srila Prabhupada's adhikar, which is authority. They have the ability to make an assessment of what is required and then write according to the needs of the population, and then basically be able to engineer a certain sadhana which they also feel the population can handle. So if someone were to ask us, is 64 rounds of bhajan adequate? The answer is no. Even if you were to chant 300 malas of the Mahamantra, it is not adequate to compensate for what we are about to receive from Lord Chaitanya. It is not. So Srila Prabhupada studied the circumstances, and based on the circumstances, he arrived at a certain strategy. He said, yes, this is what is going to be required. There seems to be that the present class of devotees who are in the movement are going to be completely dependent on the mercy of the Lord. As a consequence, they need to position themselves for mercy. What is it which we can give which would allow the devotees to position themselves for mercy? Which is practically what Srila Prabhupada did. He laid out a foundation for us which should position us for mercy. But this is not it. What does it mean? Our effort alone is not going to cut it. Our effort alone is not going to meet the goal. This is Srila Prabhupada's arrangement because he wanted us to position ourselves for mercy. So becoming a Kripa Siddha, being a Kripa Siddha, reaching perfection due to the mercy of the Lord is what we are trying to accomplish. And in that particular circumstance, how do you receive mercy? The mercy itself is received by serving Lord Chaitanya. Mercy is received by serving the mission of Lord Chaitanya as exemplified by the predecessors. They all served Lord Chaitanya, which is what they did. Mercy is being given by serving Lord Chaitanya, understanding the mission of Harinam, understanding how to spread the mission of Harinam, because that's what we would want to call it. We want to call it the mission of Harinam. Because if Harinam is going to be the sadhya and the sadhana, then we have to strategize from the perspective of how to offer Harinam to the whole world. How do you offer Harinam to everyone? So, as a consequence, The whole concept of what is called as strategy involves positioning ourselves for mercy and serving Lord Chaitanya. Positioning ourselves for mercy means that we chant Krishna, we chant Krishna's names as given by Srila Prabhupada, and we also serve Lord Chaitanya. We serve Lord Chaitanya so that we could receive benedictions from him. And Srila Prabhupada made this arrangement. He made this arrangement with Lord Gauranga, quite obviously. He made this arrangement. Yeah, there was this Mataji years back in New Vrindavan. I sat next to someone, and she was a Prabhupada disciple who was initiated by Srila Prabhupada in 1966 or 67. There was what we would call as a seminar, which was being given by my Guru Maharaj in New Vrindavan. And I had the opportunity to sit next to this very exalted, very experienced Mataji, who was a Prabhupada disciple. Now, the concept of the seminar was that you should basically discuss your realizations of what was given by Srila Prabhupada to you with your neighbor. That was the whole concept. The idea was sharing. The seminar was concept of sharing. So there were 300 people. We all had neighbors. We would just share. And I was very fortunate because I had nothing to offer, but she was a very senior disciple of Srila Prabhupada and she had everything to offer. So I was very fortunate that I sat next to her. So I asked her as to what is it which is very powerful. What do you remember about your experiences of Srila Prabhupada? So she was telling me that in the 1960s, mid 60s, late 60s, when they first started out in 26 Second Avenue in New York City, at that point in time, they all used to write letters to Srila Prabhupada. So the whole movement was being managed by mail, regular mail. Yeah. We all get quite agitated if we don't receive a WhatsApp message within 5 minutes or even within a minute of when we send it. We all get very agitated. But the whole movement was managed by regular mail. So, because the movement is a movement of consciousness, Srila Prabhupada was instilling consciousness and a higher consciousness. He was assisting the devotees who were surrendered to him to position themselves for mercy. And that was done by giving them inspiration through letters because he was traveling and he was in different temples. So the point was that they were all temple devotees, and then they all used to write to Srila Prabhupada. And they all used to write to Srila Prabhupada and they all used to read everybody else's reply because that was how they used to inspire themselves. There was no such thing as privacy. It was more a matter of, oh, Srila Prabhupada is writing, he's instructing, so if we read, then we will gain a few things. So this Mataji wrote to Srila Prabhupada, and her question, in a summary, was, how do I go back to Godhead? That's what she wrote him. So she was expecting something phenomenal, which means she was expecting something quite complicated. And we all do, by the way. And in fact, one of the most important gifts of Krishna consciousness is when you realize that the most simple activity that's been given to us is actually the most powerful. When that realization comes, you can say that your life is over. You kind of made it. But we all want complications. And Mataji, when she wrote to Srila Prabhupada, she was expecting a very complicated, elaborate reply from Srila Prabhupada. But then came the letter 2 months later. And in that letter, he had written just 2 instructions. He said, chant 16 rounds, follow the 4 regulative principles. You will go back to Godhead. So what do we understand from this? Should we understand that 16 rounds are enough? Then how do we justify the need for 64 rounds? How do we justify the need for more than 64 rounds chanted by the predecessor acharyas, the Vrindavan Vasis, and so on and so forth? So 16 rounds are not enough. Yeah. The regulative principles just make us human, bring us to the platform of, I would say, someone who is trying to attempt to understand things beyond the body. So what is it which is important? How could we say that 16 rounds is important? But Srila Prabhupada wrote that. He wrote the chant 16 rounds and follow the 4 regulative principles, and you'll go back to Godhead. So the understanding is that Srila Prabhupada had already made an arrangement with Lord Chaitanya that whoever he is giving mercy to as an agent of Lord Chaitanya, as one of the favorite agents of Lord Chaitanya, they would chant 16 rounds and serve Lord Chaitanya and the mission of Lord Chaitanya, and they will be taken back by Srila Prabhupada's arrangement. Krishna will keep the promise of Srila Prabhupada. This is our understanding. Krishna will keep the promise of Srila Prabhupada. The 16 rounds is not what is going to take us back. It is being dedicated to the mission of Lord Chaitanya, which is going to position ourselves for mercy whilst chanting 16 rounds, that is practically going to position ourselves for being able to go back to Godhead. Being more useful to Lord Chaitanya is what is going to assist us. So the 16 rounds makes us more useful. We practically become more useful. 16 rounds makes us useful, 32 rounds, surely more, and then 64, perhaps even more. But the point is, all of these rounds, in one sense, are not the main issue. The issue is positioning ourselves for mercy because we are Kripa Siddhas. And as a consequence, we need to serve the Lord's mission. When we serve the Lord's mission, we get picked up. So there's a certain strategy involved and there's a certain bhajan involved. One has to be very serious with their bhajan because without bhajan, we will not fall in love. We will not have sambandha. Without sambandha, we would not understand our beloved. We would not be able to surrender. Without surrender, we can't serve properly. So the bhajan is super important because otherwise we will not have the ability to position ourselves properly at all. Yeah, there would be no insight, no intelligence that will come to us unless we are properly executing bhajan. And the more serious we become, the greater would be the possibility of positioning ourselves so that we could be used. The greatest success of sadhana is for us to learn when to step aside. We will talk about it shortly. But I was wanting to say that there's a need for bhajan. There's a need for bhajan. There's also a need for planning. There's a need for strategy. You can't really minimize the need for planning, the need for execution, the need for strategy. You can't minimize it. How do we learn as to whether it's a part and parcel of Krishna consciousness? You have seen it occur too many times in the past. Lord Nityananda strategized with Sri Advaita Acharya Prabhu and Haridas Thakur. There's a place in Srivasangan. If you go to Srivasangan in Mayapur, just behind the temple of Sri Advaita Acharya, there is a spot where Srila Prabhupada used to sit and he used to chant before coming to the West. One of Srila Prabhupada's disciples, Mula Prakriti Mataji, she wrote about it. She wrote about the fact that the pujari of the temple back in the early 60s used to see Srila Prabhupada come there, and he used to weep uncontrollably while chanting Harinam, and he used to explain that his Gurudev has asked him to go to the West, and he just did not know how he's going to accomplish anything which his Gurudev has asked him to do. So he used to find himself extraordinarily helpless, and he used to call for mercy. But why did he choose that spot? Why did he choose the spot behind in Srivasangan? He chose that spot because that is the place where it is said that Lord Nityananda sat with Sri Advaita Acharya and Haridas Thakur and others when they were ordered to spread the mission of Lord Chaitanya in Odisha and Bengal, etc. They literally sat there, they strategized. So there is a strategy meeting that first occurred then between Lord Nityananda. So Srila Prabhupada chose that spot because he was wanting insight, he was wanting blessings. So before he wants to come to the West, he wanted to go and chant there. Now we also find that there are many instances of planning that goes on in the mission of Lord Chaitanya. Many instances. Srila Jiva Goswami, he was particularly, when he undertook the mission from Srila Rupa and Sri Sanatana after the departure, he planned to spread the mission in Bengal. He sent all the granthas through the agency of Sri Narottam Das Thakur and Srinivas Acharya and Shyamananda Prabhu, and he sent all of this to Bengal as a part of how to spread the granthas and the literature of the Sad Goswamis in Bengal. So there has been a lot of strategy, a lot of thinking on how to spread the mission in a very contextual and a manner which is also based on time, place, and circumstances. So one cannot really win if one doesn't have planning in place, either individually or collectively. There is a need for planning, there's a need for strategy on how to spread the mission of Lord Chaitanya. And this has to be done, there has to be meetings done. But the meetings themselves are not very effective unless the participants in the meeting are very deep in their bhajan, because Krishna's presence is felt through his Harinam. And if the participants themselves are not very good with their bhajan, then we are acting with material efficiency. There's no spiritual efficiency. Spiritual efficiency is where there's enough Shakti in a group of people to be able to receive the cooperation of the demigods and the cooperation of the Lord in executing the mission. Needless to say, we see so many projects in our mission which take years and years and years. It's quite unusual. Years back, in 2006, 2007, they were building a temple for Lord Balaji. This is a Hindu temple in Minnesota. And they did a phone marathon of fundraising for building of the temple. And the objective was, I think, $1 million. And this was back then, it was quite a bit. It was quite a large sum. You could accomplish things. And they did the fundraising of $1 million, and this was an ad hoc public. Yeah, this was not specifically targeting sadhakas. These were not people favorable to a certain aspect. They raised $1 million in 2 hours by phone calls. Yeah. And then when we come to building temples for Lord Chaitanya, it takes 20 years for us to accomplish things. So it's quite fascinating to see how there's a certain complexity in doing things within Lord Chaitanya's movement versus accomplishing what we would need to do for regular religion. You see, mundane religion, I'm talking about regular religion as in the people who are going to be facilitated to meet the 4 areas of life, dharma, artha, kama, moksha. These are the 4 objectives. These are called the purusha arthas. Then our particular objective is called the parama purushartha, which has got nothing to do with the basic mundane objectives of religion, but our own objectives are loftier because we want to develop a transcendental relationship with the Lord. So our projects take on a certain complexity. And the complexity itself is also a part of how the yatra gets purified. There are many adjustments. They all have to endeavor. There's a lot of crying. And then eventually, Lord Chaitanya gives in and says, okay, here's the better alternative. So we all endeavor, become purified, and then here's the better alternative. But when he chooses to participate, when Lord Gauranga wants to give something, it is so easy. It just happens like this, like a snap. So this is the point. The idea is that when there is strategy, if there's serious bhajan, then there's a lot of cooperation, because then the participants in that particular strategy meeting have already gone deep enough into the bhajan to understand the needs and have adequate ability to bring forth the Shakti of Lord Gauranga and to spread it. So this is a very important consideration, that there has to be bhajan, there has to be strategy, both have to be there. Now, what is this quality that we spoke of? Saying that to accomplish things, we notice in these 3 verses, Ashwatthama, being an accomplished warrior, could only cause destruction. Arjuna could retract and cause destruction because the Lord desired it, and Arjuna was completely dependent on the Lord. Now, what is it which Arjuna's mindset was? So we want to understand it from the perspective of accomplishing things for the mission of Lord Chaitanya. From the aspect of accomplishing things for Lord Chaitanya, there are 2 things. One needs to have compassion. And it is not superficial material compassion. It is compassion where we carry the mood of Lord Nityananda adequately in our hearts. And what is the mood of Lord Nityananda? The mood of Lord Nityananda is the blessing of Lord Chaitanya when he asked him to go and spread the mission. What is this blessing which Lord Chaitanya gave him? It is the fact that Lord Chaitanya experienced the separation from Krishna as Srimati Radharani would when he was Lord Gauranga. You see, when he was coming as Gauranga, he was in the mood of Srimati Radharani, and he was in intense separation. That intense separation from Krishna gave him insight as to the separation felt by the jivas of the planet. You see, empathy was observed because this was Srimati Radharani in separation. That's why Srimati Radharani is supermost for us. And as a consequence, she, the Divine Mother, she's separated from her Lord, and she is able to understand suffering of separation. And she is looking at all of us and saying, how is it possible that you pass lifetime after lifetime in separation when I can't even bear to close my eyes because I can't even bear the separation of not being able to be with him even for a single fraction of a second? So this feeling of separation of Srimati Radharani, which is in the heart of Lord Chaitanya, transformed itself into the intense compassion which Lord Nityananda had. That was real power. The real power was the power of love. The power of love from the heart of Lord Chaitanya was imposed upon Lord Nityananda to such an extent that he became mad with ecstasy. His erratic behavior became more erratic when he received this extraordinary burden of extraordinary compassion that he carried upon his head, which was given by Lord Chaitanya. He carried this compassion, he distributed it. Now, to become a proper vehicle, we need to develop compassion. And how does one develop compassion? Developing compassion is a matter of Harinam again. What is it one has to do? One has to chant Harinam. One will become compassionate and will have a better perception if they were to chant the holy names. So, how do we achieve compassion? This is a very important ingredient for empowerment. If you want to do things for Krishna, compassion is the primary ingredient. This is why Srila Prabhupada was crying. He was crying because he had developed this extraordinary compassion in his heart, but yet he felt so helpless. So there's a need for compassion and there's a need for deep humility. So one wants to save the world, but also understands their inability to save the world. Then Krishna will look at the person and say that you're compassionate, at the same time you're humble enough to step aside so that I could use you. Then that is how one gets used in the mission of Lord Chaitanya. One needs to learn to become compassionate, and one also needs to learn when to step aside and become an instrument. This whole program of being compassionate and being humble enough to step aside so that the disciplic succession could use them is granted by Harinam. So there is a need for us to focus primarily on Harinam whilst having a discussion and understanding of implementing individual strategy, and there's also a need for collective strategy to enthuse everybody. So the point being that there is a need for planning. One needs to be able to understand what is it which they need to do. If the whole program given by Lord Chaitanya and given by Srimad Bhagavatam is Nashta Prayeshu Abhadreshu, and we say that Abhadreshu is passion and ignorance, the 10th offense, the final offense of chanting Harinam says having material desires, even after receiving so many instructions on the glories of Harinam. What are these material desires? These material desires are nothing but being in touch with passion and ignorance. Being in touch with passion and ignorance for our own purpose is practically the problem with Abhadreshu. This is the whole idea. So the strategy of a devotee should be that a long-term strategy, because Krishna consciousness is a 40, 50-year haul, depending on how long we're going to be on the planet. It can be a very long-term proposition. So one needs to have strategy. One needs to understand that a long-term goal, we can't really survive by constantly exposing ourselves to the very things that we are constantly trying to get rid of. It doesn't make any sense. If Nashta Prayeshu Abhadreshu means passion and ignorance, and we immerse ourselves in passion and ignorance on a day-to-day basis, then how is it that we're going to ever develop the critical mass for us to be able to escape out? What is it which is going to allow us to develop the potency for us to be able to say that what I did yesterday is still with me because I haven't really covered it with all kinds of nonsense which I've done today? So there has to be a long-term strategy to wean ourselves away from dependence on the material world. What does it mean? It means that one has to have the ability to think ahead and say that I want to increase my service to the mission of Lord Chaitanya measurably in the next 10 years, for which a certain amount of money is required. If I'm going to work tomorrow, I'm going to keep those objectives in mind so that I can wean myself away at some point and contribute more profoundly to the mission of Lord Chaitanya. This is individual strategy. It does not mean one gives up family life. It does not mean one needs to leave the West. In fact, one needs to be in the West because that's where our work is. That's what Srila Prabhupada did. And then we need to basically have a strategy of being able to exist in that environment without actually being in touch with that environment. Be in the place, but don't be in touch with the place so profoundly that every day as you go, you're practically undoing what was done the previous day, the previous week, the previous month, the previous year. So this is strategy. This requires some thought process. This requires a desire. This requires a desire to wean ourselves away from an environment which is specifically contaminating. You see, sound vibration is contaminating. Sound vibration, which is particularly passionate, is very contaminating. Because if you hear that, then you're going to develop desires. Now we are surrounded by people, surrounded by energies where this sound vibration is pronounced. And as a consequence, we develop desires that are unqualified. And then we come back to removing those desires on a day-to-day basis. So this is like being on a treadmill. Yeah. So unless you have a strategy to be able to wean yourself away from influences, it is not going to work. So there's a need for us to understand this. It's required. It is required. Sometimes preachers may not broach this because of the sensitivity, but it is important to understand that yes, if you have to achieve something very lofty, yeah, we also have to be ready to somewhat pay the price and position ourselves. What is so extraordinary? Women and men in the entertainment industry, they go through all kinds of horrendous diets and exercise just to maintain their bodies. Yeah. People in the athletic field, the sports field, they set goals for maintaining a certain weight, because once they go out of that weight range, they can't really compete in that particular band with others very effectively. They all go through all kinds of sacrifices for extraordinarily trivial objectives, which nobody remembers after a few years, because there's someone else who has gone up, and done something which is a little better. But our objective is enormous, because we are practically trying to reverse a millions of years of, existence in a certain plane. We are trying to basically do things which rishis and sages struggled for thousands of years. So why can't we understand that this is going to require a different kind of mindset? So we need to understand that yes, you can be a part of the corporate agenda, but have your own objectives while you are a part of the corporate agenda, which is going to protect you. Tolerate the circumstances at work. Yeah. Be a part of the workplace. If you're working 8 hours, there's nothing wrong in making money, because money is required. It's practical. But have an objective. Have the objective of weaning yourself away, because that's required. This is strategy. Collective strategy is to be able to somehow or the other make things easier for a community. And this is also something which can happen over a period of time when there are many individuals who become very serious about making things work for them. So this is required. This is particularly of a great importance to us. Yeah. So there is a need for strategy, and there's a need for bhajan. Without bhajan, there's going to be no compassion. Without bhajan, there's going to be no humility. We will practically be materially efficient, and material efficiency normally results in chaos. Normally. Yeah. We do not want to be efficient materially. We do not want material efficiency. We are looking for spiritual efficiency, where things become easy for us. What is it for Krishna to order one of his servants, the demigods, to help us move forward? There's nothing. In fact, there's a very, very wonderful cooperation that occurs between the devotees, the demigods, and Krishna. It's wonderful. The idea is to be able to come under that shelter more effectively, so that we are able to move forward. Yeah. So we covered a few things in these 3 verses. So we covered the fact, I want to quickly summarize. We covered the fact of a need to understand that Krishna consciousness and Krishna prema can be a part of our lives, even if there are challenges. So one shouldn't imagine that peace is the objective of Krishna consciousness. Does it mean that we are going to be assailed and we're going to be put in the same circumstances as the Pandavas? No, it does not mean that. It simply means that we don't set that objective for ourselves. Peace is not the objective of Krishna consciousness. We see that in context. We also saw that there's a need for strategy. There's also a need for bhajan. We also saw the fact that we are kripa siddhas. We are basically dependent on the mercy potency of the Lord. Positioning ourselves for kripa is the only objective that we have. And we do that by doing what Srila Prabhupada has asked us to do, because Krishna will keep Srila Prabhupada's promises. For no other reason would we be qualified other than being a part of Srila Prabhupada's mission. It's very important for us to remember that. The other part to it is that as we chant, we become more readily available. There's a need for humility, there's a need for compassion. Humility and compassion are gifts of Harinam. Deeper the humility, deeper the compassion, then we have the ability to move forward as well. Yeah. So we will end here. And then if there are any questions, if there's time for questions, I can take a couple of them. But it's up to the organizers.
Yes, Prabhu. Thank you. Thank you. I have sent a question to you. Someone asked me a question.
Okay, let me just read it. Peace is not the objective of Krishna consciousness. The goal is far, far above the material mode of goodness. To desire peace is at a low bar. Okay.
Sorry, that's just me.
Okay, those are your notes. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, I've got a question from someone. Question is it okay to chant 16 rounds on the beads, and the rest of the day can we chant without beads while doing our activities? Absolutely. Absolutely. Being in touch with Harinam is always, extraordinarily auspicious. However, we want to understand this. When you go to work, it's better to be useful at the workplace and understand the dharma of the workplace. Yeah. So sometimes we find that devotees feel that it is okay for them to cheat the employer and then use that time to do things for Krishna, and that is okay. The answer is it just becomes very difficult from an integrity issue. And we also see that there are many devotee businesses that open up, which are very hesitant to recruit devotees because they call up and say, there's a special devotee coming and they want to attend Bhagavatam class and they can't come in on time. Yeah. Or they would say that I had this special puja and they had this doing and that doing, I can't really come on time. So these are all things which practically cause issues in the longer run. So it's important for us to be practical with the dharma of the circumstance that we are in, and also be able to effectively keep in touch with Krishna consciousness. If your work allows you some time to chant, some time to read without affecting your work, then by all means, please do it. But we also want to remember that maintaining the dharma of that workplace is also our responsibility while we are there. So I just want to be clear about how this is to be achieved. Yeah.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Any other question or comment?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Thank you for the wonderful points that you've put forward. Very interesting what you mentioned, and really appreciate what you said about having integrity around your work. Because sometimes, you know, there are certain demands that require that. It's good not to make it, not to compromise, like you said, dharma of the work. But I just wanted to ask about this. You mentioned about Harinam and this being deep in your bhajan and everything, and wonderful points. It's a reminder that we are, you know, this. If you're not materially exhausted with this material world, then it can be different. Then you might not be able to appreciate things. But the reminder of this material world is that we are actually exhausted, and the elite of society and the leaders of society, unfortunately, move forward possibly with ignorance, and in fact with ignorance, but also with disregard of these wonderful principles. In recent times, in this last year, we've seen that there's been a lot of corporate companies have allowed people to work from home, and but this is actually and this is a thing that many of these corporate companies have said, that we've come 10 years, we've progressed 10 years in advance of where we want. This would have been this would have taken us 10 years to do, yet we did this in 1 year. Yet in this material world, even after all these lockdowns and things, people are going to revert back to their old ignorant ways. Yet there is actually an alternative that is far superior and has far lofty ideals than just to attain peace in the world. So how can these elite and leaders of society be approached in such a way that actually the rapid progress around bringing people to the idea of spiritual science can be implemented, actually do this rapidly, as opposed to very slowly and very regressively? How can this be done?
Very good question. Now, one of the most important things that we want to take is we want to understand history. We want to understand history of how the movement operated over several centuries. And we want to see what has consistently worked. The movement has always faced tribulations. 500 years back, what is interesting is that when Lord Chaitanya distributed Harinam and he uncovered Vrindavan Dham and he made it quite prominent, by the time his departure occurred, the time of Srila Jiva Goswami and others, Vrindavan was covered over again, and it had to be uncovered, it had to be distributed, it had to basically, they had to proclaim, you know, the pastimes of the Lord in a more profound way. So it was covered over in a very short window. And what is interesting is to see is that in that very short window, there were so many different falsehoods that were spread about the nature of the Gaudiya Vaishnava mission, which also had to be uprooted through very firm Shastric foundation that was laid by the Goswamis, which means that even the Supreme Lord coming in the context of 500 years back, the whole mission was covered over in a short span, because that was how powerful material energy is in terms of being able to cover over the truth in certain ways. And then very powerful individuals of Krishna consciousness, they come and they uncover and they kind of present knowledge to the population in a fresh way. Now, there was a crisis 200 years hence after the departure of the Lord during Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's time, when India was ruled by Aurangzeb, the Mughal, and then there was destruction of all the temples in Vrindavan, and then the Vaishnavis were assaulted, the Brahmanas had to flee, and everybody had to kind of practice Krishna consciousness undercover, even in Vraja, and everything had to happen in a very, I would say, hidden way. So the environment was not cooperating. Again, 500 years back, and again in the 17th century, 200 years back, during 300 years back, during the time of Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. Then comes the time of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Very complex situation again, because there were so many sampradayas, and he had to struggle even to find a legitimate copy of Srimad Bhagavatam to draw upon, so that he could basically begin his work of refounding the Gaudiya Vaishnava mission. And he was a very, he is practically one of the most successful preachers who could understand the tenor. He could understand the what do you call as the mood of people during the time, and he could present things in a very, very visionary way. He was very innovative in his preaching, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Now, the point I'm trying to make is there's a certain consistency in strategy regardless of the environment, and we need to adopt it. And the consistency itself is that practicing devotees have to be very, very serious with what they do. And if they do what they are supposed to do in a very serious way, then they become instruments in the hands of Lord Chaitanya, which is what has been seen in Gaudiya Vaishnava history. All kinds of chaos existed during Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur's time, during Srila Prabhupada's time in the West when he was preaching. It was surrounded, and what did he have? He had souls who practically were completely unregulated. They were all looking for some kind of form, some kind of substance to hold on to. And that was the time when the hippie movement took place in America. So the point I'm trying to make is we are used to chaos. Our movement is used to chaos. Our response has always been consistent. Our response has always been consistent. Those who succeed in chaotic times are individuals who themselves are very, very serious about what they can do with their lives. So what I'm saying is that before we embark on trying to reach a global presence, we need to work on individuals, and because that has been the history of a movement. And then we need to do what Lord Chaitanya wanted us to do, which is to spread Harinam. How do you spread Harinam? Increase the presence of Harinam parties. Every temple should increase the presence of Harinam parties. Take as many opportunities as possible during the week to do Harinam on the roads. This is basically our old strategy, but it has been consistent over all kinds of chaos that the world has seen in different forms throughout the different places of the world. So the point I'm trying to make is twofold. One, there's a need for a greater presence of Harinam. But even before we do Harinam, our own bhajan has to be proper. Then we get used as instruments. That'll be the response that I would give you, because chaos and unsettling circumstances are not new to this movement, but we have always been consistent with our approach. I was just wanting to basically share that. I think that's where we should start. Now, how you package it and how you're going to move ahead, that will also come as a part of increasing intensity of bhajan.
Hare Krishna. Wonderful points you raised. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. This is Shamanand speaking.
Haribol.
I hope there's some time. It's already 9 o'clock. So can I had a few things to just share, and I'm really thankful for inspiring and enlivening class. Just a few points I wanted to share with you. Like,
yes, Prabhu.
Yeah. Prabhupada mentioned, about 16 rounds, Actually, there was a pastime where Prabhupada mentioned, quoting Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he said, if we don't chant 16 rounds, 64 rounds, we have fallen. He mentioned this in next of instruction also. So how can we go back to God at fallen people? So Prabhupada said that my spiritual master has front door keys, but I have back door keys. So if you sincerely chant, then I'll give you entry from back door. So Prabhupada took that thing. Of course, I mean, so just to encourage us, he gave that, thing answer. And also 16 round doesn't mean that, just, this what you call quality round should be there. Normally best time in the morning, because sometimes, honestly speaking, when we get up to chant 16 rounds also, sometimes it's struggle when you're working, if you're not organized. At least in my case, I can honestly share. And then Bhaktivinoda Thakur said, this love of Godhead, if one achieves love of Godhead, even a glimpse of it, that transforms into compassion, for the jivas. So unless we have something, we can't give. So of course, it doesn't mean that we have to wait until we achieve love of Godhead, but that's how the compassion comes into, thing for the jivas. And then uh, about this, what you call, even if someone wants to achieve Vaikuntha, it's back to Godhead. It's there mentioned in Dhruva Maharaj's this one pastime. At the end of that, Dhruva Maharaj goes back to Godhead. There's this verse I'm just reading for information. It's mentioned that self-effulgent Vaikuntha planets, by whose illumination alone all the illuminating planets within this material world give of reflected light, cannot be reached by those who are not merciful to other living entities. Only persons who constantly engage in welfare activities for other living entities can reach the Vaikuntha planets. So it's not that just sadhana itself, but that compassion is also one of the required element. And particularly, we are part of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's movement. We need to cultivate that thing. And of course, there's negative side and positive side of coronavirus. But actually, if we see positive side, I feel like it's Lord Chaitanya's coronavirus, because now people are stressed out. They don't know what to do. It's economics are crumbling apart. No matter what they are trying to do, just with this virus. So it's one of the best opportunities. But Prabhupada said, tax your brains if you want to preach this effectively. And also he mentioned to Giraj Maharaj, in the middle of the night, he woke him up. When he asked him how this movement will go on, he gives different reasons. We have to be sincere, serious. Prabhupada just put it that answer: organization, intelligence. So this is lacking. From my own personal experience, I've seen that we are not organized. Just to give one last example, say one devotee, he does Harinam every Saturday, Ananta Purushottam Prabhu in manner. He is in his now 60s. So, so I was just sharing with him some things, and then he said, Shamanand, Protestants here in UK don't like, organized religion. So we tell them, please come to us. We are the most disorganized. So I'm just sharing this because we need to become organized. And of course, intelligence, which comes from the 10th canto, 10th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, 10th verse, Tesham satatayuktanam bhajatam pritipurokam dadami buddhikam inamam upayantite. So both are needed. Otherwise, as you said, say material efficiency results in chaos. So say these were some of the thoughts I thought, share with. And of course, last thing, Harinam was part until the book distribution came into existence in ISKCON 70s. Then they put aside book distribution only, Harinam, they left aside Harinam and only book distribution. But later on, that book distribution disappeared. Then no Harinam, no book distribution. But Harinam, as mentioned, it's a must. And particularly, if someone wants to solve problems, Giraj Maharaj nicely mentions, whenever you would go, he mentions early 70s when he was managing Juhu temple, there would be so many problems. So they kept aside one day for chanting, in the temple. That day when he chanted, all the problems dissolved in that chanting itself. So there's no need to make so many arrangements, like Prabhupada said, instead of resolution, dissolution, revolutions, and then no chant, and dissolution, and no solution, there should be chanting. So I'm just sharing, but it was really, it was nice, enlivening to hear you. But I thought, within that one, it's my humble.
Thank you.
I prefer to speak to you at some other time. I had the fortune to host you in Manchester previously when you came 3-4 years back.
Oh, okay. So,
thank you
very
very
nice.
much for your class. Hopefully, we'll catch up in future. Thank you.
Sure,
Thank you.
Prabhu.
I'm sorry for giving, but I'm just sharing realizations when you mentioned that, thing.
No, it's perfect. It's so wonderful to hear, Prabhu. No, perfect. Don't worry.
Thank you, Prabhu. Yeah. Thank you very much for giving us the opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah.
We still have a minute, Prabhu. If there are any questions, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I have no problem. Yeah, I'm here. I just set time aside. So if there's any other question, I'm happy to leave.
Just a really quick question, Prabhu. If we want to hear, do you have any live programs during the week that we could hear or
yes,
have, where we can interact with those?
Yes, yes, I do. As a matter of fact, I offer live Bhagavatam class every Saturday. It's approximately around noontime UK, and I have a WhatsApp group where I post the Zoom link, and of course everybody is free to participate. Santosh Prabhu has the group credentials, so if anybody wants to come to that WhatsApp group, you can just write to me. He can pass on my WhatsApp to you, and then I will add you, and I would be happy to have you over on Saturdays.
Thank you, Prabhu. Yes, we'll do that.
Excellent. Thank you.
Santosh Prabhu, perhaps you could just put my WhatsApp number on chat with the country code. It's I can give it to everybody. It is 1-201-948-4878. It's 1-201-948-4878. So
Yes,
you can write to me, and then I'll be happy to include you in the WhatsApp group. And it's just the WhatsApp group is for sending out Zoom invites, etc. So it'll be good.
Yeah, I've shared the number, and whoever asks me, I'll send this number to them, Prabhu. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Any more questions, please? Because it's a unique opportunity for us to ask questions. It's not easy to get Prabhu to give the class. I think there's a question, Prabhu.
Okay. Is it on chat or?
It's on chat, Prabhu.
Okay, let me just look into it.
Thank you, Prabhu.
How do we best position ourselves for the mercy of the Lord? Best positioning ourselves for the mercy of the Lord is, again, it falls back on being able to focus on our sadhana. Positioning ourselves for mercy of the Lord is to be able to focus on our sadhana particularly, and being able to accept the environment as given by the Lord. That includes our life, it includes the devotees whom we are with, it includes the opportunities that we have around the area that we are in, and being able to understand that this is where the Lord has arranged for us, and then being able to see how best we could serve the community and also be able to participate. So the point I'm trying to make is positioning ourselves is all about being able to perform our sadhana, because our sadhana particularly allows us to position ourselves. It gives us the necessary ingredients for us to position ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Prabhu, I have a question. It's more of a technical question. Please forgive me. When you said Brahmaji meditated for 1,000 years, so but his lifespan is 100 years. So is it 1,000 Bhumandala years, or how do we understand this, Prabhu?
Well, 1,000, you see, in terms of the Bhumandala years, when they're writing Srimad Bhagavatam, they were giving us the context from the perspective of where Lord Brahma was. But then again, we have to realize that Srimad Bhagavatam, when they speak of Lord Brahma, they are talking of Lord Brahma of this universe. Sometimes they include Srimad Bhagavatam portions from other universes. So it's a very complex situation to understand the time span. So one way to look at it is to see that it was 1,000 years based on our calculation.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yes, it makes sense. Thank you, Prabhu.
Sure.
I don't think there are any questions, Prabhu, and I would like to thank you again for today's Srimad Bhagavatam class. Look forward to the next one when you're free, Prabhu.
Oh, sure. I'm very happy to be of service. There's one question here. It says, sometimes it's very difficult to build humility because in certain circumstances we take a lot of pride. How can we make this aspect of humility more practical in that situation? One of the most important aspects about our daily existence is to develop a certain set of habits and approaches. Then these habits and approaches then can become a part of our culture. One of the most important aspects is for us to be able to accept and process and make this a habit to take each and every experience that we have, regardless of whether it's auspicious or inauspicious, as being arranged by the Lord. That is the definition of humility. When we accept it that it is arranged by the Lord, then we are positioning ourselves to receive intelligence from Him, to how to process it, what to do, what to not to do, etc. So if you notice in Srimad Bhagavatam, I was speaking about this yesterday in the class, in the Bhagavatam class I gave. Sri Vidura, who was very dear to the Lord, was thrown out of the assembly of the Kurus. But then he really didn't process it in a negative way. He said, this is the effect of material energy. Material energy is basically the cause, and material energy is controlled by the Lord, so I will accept it as the Lord's arrangement. What ensued was he left the assembly of the Kurus and went on parikrama. And during the parikrama, he met with Sri Uddhava in Mathura near the Yamuna Deva. And then Sri Uddhava basically told him to go and meet Sri Maitreya Rishi, who had a message for him from the Lord himself. The point being, accepting the circumstances of life, accepting circumstances that we come upon, both auspicious and inauspicious, and making this a part of our culture, and making it a part of our approach to life, is how we should proceed. This is humility. And this, in turn, would position ourselves to receive intelligence on how to process the event. It will also give us the ability to have a proper response. That's basically should be the fundamental approach. Because it's not a matter of choosing one or the other. If you just have this very consistent approach saying this is Krishna's arrangement, and then we need to understand how to serve under these circumstances, then we would automatically have a much, much better ideal response and better consciousness as well all the time. Yeah.
I have someone just sent this question to me, Prabhu. How do we inspire kids to stay away from gaming and other screen times? How do we balance their studies and spiritual studies and their
Sure.
the
So
urge
this
to
is
go access the system again and again? Yeah, sorry.
yeah. See, basically, when we grew up, we had a much better time because we were always outside. You see, we just didn't have much to do inside the house. When we were children, that we just had a lot of time outside because that was how society was. We used to spend time playing, physical activity, literally engaging in interactions with our friends. So the kids of these days, they have all kinds of distractions and all kinds of, I would say, powerful devices which can capture the imagination. They can serve it. They can also capture the imagination to the point where it becomes addictive. But ultimately, the best thing that we could do is to offer them the same process that Prabhupada gave to everyone, param drishtva nivartate. Start with being very strict with prasadam. As long as we are strict with prasadam, which means bhoga offerings at home, and then the distribution of that bhoga offering, which is prasadam to the members of the family, become very strict in how it is prepared and how it is distributed, it would automatically have a transformation in consciousness, and it would automatically bring a better taste, a higher taste. So it's param drishtva nivartate, and greater level of interaction with devotee children, etc., would automatically occur. So I'm just wanting to basically say that we have to go back to the basics as far as the children are concerned as well. Monitor what they eat, give them what they're supposed to eat, which is nicely offered, which they like to eat, more importantly. And that in turn would constantly keep them from getting too involved in things which are of a dangerous nature. That is the first point. The second is engage them in service, especially in areas that they are very interested in, where they can use their limbs. If you use your limbs in the service of the Lord, it becomes purified. By using the limbs in the service of the Lord and having Krishna Prasadam, then one has the ability to give up habits which are not conducive. Lastly, if it is a principle of addiction, it is basically because the mind is weak. How do you strengthen the mind? Be very strict with Ekadashi fasting. Ekadashi fasting is so powerful that it has the ability to give us the ability to control our mind. If anybody tries, for example, doing Nirjal even for one full year, and I know this is not applicable to the question or probably relevant, but it's important. If anybody does Nirjal for a whole year, every Ekadashi you do Nirjal, 30 Ekadashis odd in the year, approximately, 24 Ekadashis. So when you do Nirjal, what we will find that a year down the line, our mental faculties are much, much more under our control than they ever were. It's very purifying. So it's the other strategy that can be implemented as well.
Thank you very much, Prabhu. I think we don't have any more questions, so I would like to thank you again.
Sure.
His Grace Vrindavan, Sri Vrindavan Prabhu ki Jai.